a greater percentage of the intensity load for most, I think, working professionals, amateurs, should be allocated to the bike.
That Triathlon Show 202. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Conrad Goeringer, who is a coach and author of the book The Working Triathlete, which is also the name of his business and website. We discuss how to maximize the limited training time that most amateur athletes have, and how to make the most of a lower volume training program that most of you are forced to have. Before we get into this discussion, however, big thanks to our sponsors. First, we have Precision Hydration that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Take their free online sweat test, and that will consist of a quiz of 10 questions, I believe, that you can answer in just a few minutes' time. And nothing that you need to measure or anything like that. You can answer it based on things that should already be pretty clear to you once you think for a second or two about it. And that will give you a validated estimate for how much you sweat and how much sodium you lose in your sweats, which is really, really important information to have, especially when racing in hot or humid climates. And based on this information, you will also get a free personalized hydration strategy that you can use right away, whichever electrolyte products you end up using. But if you want to use Precision Hydration products, then you can try your first box or tube for free with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps. And again, that URL is precisionhydration.com. Also, big thanks to Roka that you can find on roka.com. That's roka.com. They are the world-leading manufacturers of wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, and high-performance eyewear. And over the last year or two, Roka have really focused a lot of attention and innovation in that performance eyewear category, but also branching out to making products like prescription glasses, blue light blocking glasses, and just casual streetwear sunglasses. So there's a mix of style and performance there. Definitely make sure you go and check out all that they have to offer. I personally love their aviator sunglasses, as well as on the more training performance side, the SL series, which are great glasses as well. So check them out on roka.com and take 20% off your order with the promo code TTS, all caps. Without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Conrad Goeringer. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Conrad. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well as well. Thank you. And at this point, I also want to say thank you to Rob, who introduced us, Rob Sleemaker, who's a past guest of the show. So thank you, Rob. Conrad and I met up in Nice and had a great dinner out and discussed triathlon, and here we are now recording a podcast.
Yes. Thanks for the connection, Rob. And yes, definitely had a good time in Nice at the World Champs. I guess it was 2 weekends ago. It's great just being part of that celebration and joining all the other, committed athletes in the world. And that was a great dinner. And I love talking about triathlon. So certainly enjoyed our time and our conversation.
Yeah, time flies, and we'll probably have to make this conversation a little bit shorter, because otherwise it will be just way too long for a podcast. So, we'll do our best, and we have already selected how to scope out this episode, with this being mostly about how to train as a time-crunched athlete, which is something that you specialize in. So why don't you first start with give us an overview of who you are and how you've come to specialize in coaching these kinds of athletes?
Sure. So I'm based out of the United States, and I've been a lifelong endurance athlete, and I am currently a triathlon coach, coach a number of athletes all over the world. And I think throughout my whole life, I've been interested in people who have the ability to achieve more. And, whether that's an Elon Musk or whoever, a prolific author, and what kind of separates these people. And I think it tends to be deliberate practice and emphasizing the fundamentals. And when one does that, they can, I think, be more efficient, and they tend to simply achieve more. So in triathlon, it's interesting because most triathletes are, in fact, not professionals. They're amateurs. And, the very concept of being an amateur, it insinuates that you have probably a full-time job and other responsibilities. So it precludes you from training like a professional with, the 20 to 40 plus hours per week of training. So it's just not feasible or realistic. But, these same amateurs, they want to do well. The type A personality is very common in triathlon, but, most athletes also have other life stressors. So what I am most interested in is sort of how to manipulate microcycles and macrocycles in order to maximize performance on race day within the confines of one's life. So the goal is not to accrue an impressive training log, and because that's not what determines race results. What determines race results is fitness and the ability to perform. And I think that volume is certainly important, but we have to be realistic and identify or recognize the fact that most people they have to scale their training so that it fits their life.
So to frame this, what would the typical amateur athlete that has a full-time job, what sort of volume when you're coaching them do you see them do? And let's say that, well, you can take it for whatever distance you want, and it might differ for the full distance to the sprint distance. But what is typical, or a couple of typical examples?
Sure. So certainly it depends on the distance, and maybe even more importantly, it depends on the athlete's life schedule. But, as a minimum, I think, 6 hours is certainly the minimum for, I think performing well in a sprint triathlon. I'm talking about performing reasonably well. But, I think that 8 to 10 hours is, I found to be a good solid time frame for good performance in sprint Olympics, all the way up to 70.3 for certain individuals. And then for Ironman, I think a running average of 10 hours plus. You do want to do a block. You have to respect the iron distance, and, bumping it up to 14 hours for, say, a race specific block where you're doing a key endurance ride and run is realistic for most people. Some guys can do it on 10 to 12, but, you do want to accrue race specific volume if you're focusing on Ironman. But still, I think that's lower than maybe most athletes execute. So in general, I'm an advocate of really just working on the engine first and honing that high-end fitness. So boosting the key metrics, aerobic capacity and functional threshold power, and then later on moving on to the race-specific work. However, I think that, for an Ironman specifically, people maybe overemphasize the necessity of race-specific work. So I'm talking about massive volume for weeks and weeks and weeks. I think once you create the foundation of fitness, that, you don't need to do, 10, 100 milers. I think, doing targeted workouts of 3 to 4 hours and a couple of rides more than that is actually sufficient for most people. And I think that it's easier for people to assimilate triathlon into their lives when they strive for efficiency. But all of this is really in the context of the individual's life, because everybody's different. And, I'm not advocating that Jan Frodeno should cut his volume, down to 15 to 20 hour per weeks, because volume is certainly beneficial. But, I'm talking about how to structure training if one wants to maximize potential within this time-strapped life. And so that's really the ultimate goal of what I focus on. So it's what I'm interested in, because, you know, a lot of people they lack time. They might have all the motivation in the world, but they still want to perform in other areas of their lives.
Yeah, you've mentioned in our conversations and then in our email exchanges that it's not a hack, it's not a shortcut, it's just pure and simple, trying to make the most of the available time that you have. So that's clear that that's the perspective you're coming from, and the Jan Frodeno example is a good one. It's not for him, but for working professionals, for sure it is, because if they try to do what Jan does, they would die after a week. It would be impossible to do that. They wouldn't get to sleep.
Right.
So when we are, if we are this time strapped athlete, what are the principles then that goes into making the most of the time that we have available on a sort of lower volume plan, as we're discussing now?
Sure. So the overarching goal is to extract the fitness benefits from workouts as efficiently as possible. So, you know, this means having a purpose for each workout and doing the work that advances the fitness, and then scaling the rest. Because, I mean, fitness is not a bank account that increases proportionally to the number of hours we spend working out. I know the traditional endurance model, it does emphasize volume but, you know, we aren't robots or algorithms. We're biological organisms, and ultimately what we want to do as training is you know, generate the stimulus, and then obviously our body responds by inciting adaptations to the work that we do. So as some general principles, when you're looking to really maximize the fitness benefit relative to the time investment, I think number one is a concept that frequency trumps occasional big days. So frequency and consistency is important, because the frequent stimulus, it leads the body to incite these adaptations more frequently. It leads to more total quality work and higher volume with less trauma on the body, because I do think that trauma and potential for injury increases in a more or less exponential manner with the duration of the sessions. So when you work out more frequently, it ends up being more convenient, and it's easier to carve out time blocks. And you have more agility with training. So, you know, you can, once you realize that there is a massive benefit to, you know, workouts that are less than an hour, you can, it's more easy to drop in these workouts, to take advantage of smaller time blocks within training. But I do think that striving in general for at least 3 bikes a week is important. 4 is better. At least 4 runs in a week, you know, slightly more is better. And then depending on one's swimming ability and goals, I think 2 is a minimum number of times to swim each week. And then 3 to 4 is certainly better. But I think scaling the workouts and peeling back the duration of each of these individual workouts so that you increase the frequency and hit those targets in training, i.e. the number of sessions within each discipline each week. I think that's more important than, honestly, overall volume for various reasons, convenience, but also I think that it inspires consistency. Because one thing that I found coaching individuals is that many people have this idea that, you know, if I can't do this workout precisely as prescribed, I'm not going to do anything. And we want to try to avoid that. So emphasizing frequency and shortening the session, I think it's mentally easier for people to sort of tackle a training plan when that's the case. And that inspires frequency and consistency. And when you're consistent, that's when you get better. So if you're consistent over time, that's how people get fast. Doing crash training does not lead to long-term success. So it's really about manipulating the plan. So there's a psychological component to it as well, where sort of frequency and consistency, you always want to strive for the path of least resistance. So those are the reasons I think consistency or specifically frequency is the most important component of a good sustainable training plan.
Yeah, I agree with all of those, and it's actually very easy to do on the bike and run in particular, because most time-strapped athletes, they do have the ability to train indoors now, so you can just jump on the bike and do a quick 45-minute session, and there you go. And the same for the run, 30 to 45 minutes, and you have a good session done. And the swim is a bit more difficult depending on where you live, of course, but that's obviously why you have less frequent swimming in that sort of template week that you described with the frequency of the different disciplines, and also is the shortest discipline in a triathlon, relatively speaking. So it makes sense to focus more on where you can make the bigger difference. So definitely agree with all of that.
Exactly, and certainly one needs to take into consideration one's talents and one's strengths and one's limiters, and also one's ultimate goals in the specific race that they're training for. If one is a good swimmer, really don't need to swim that much. And if they want to do long course, especially, it's going to have the smallest impact to their day. The difference between one's maximum potential swim versus their, sort of, I'm going to swim twice a week swim is probably not more than 5 minutes in an Ironman. A day that ranges from 8 hours to 17, it's not that, large of a deal. And in most instances, emphasizing the bike is going to just lead to a better race. There's much more time to be gained by honing cycling fitness and run fitness than there is swimming fitness. That isn't to say the swim isn't important, especially for beginners, because they oftentimes, a lot of people in their first triathlon, they panic. And so you certainly have to respect the swim and the fact that it's a high stress discipline. So certain people certainly need to swim more often. But in the hierarchy of importance, I do think that the bike and the run is more important, especially for a time-strapped individual. But you're obviously right. You mentioned indoor riding, and one of the most important considerations when it comes to scaling training to one's life is trying to eliminate as much prep time and travel time as possible. So that's why one of the reasons, it's pretty much mandated that if I coach somebody that they should get an indoor trainer and ideally a power meter, just because you have the ability to execute targeted sessions with no prep time. You don't have to worry about traffic lights or traveling to a country road that one can actually execute intervals on. You can literally roll out of bed, hop on the trainer, and then execute a targeted workout. So that indoor riding is pretty much essential at this point, and most professionals they buy in now. It's a normal thing. It isn't some peripheral sort of exotic thing. Everybody is riding indoors just because of the effectiveness and the ability to save time. But so that's important. And obviously there are certain brick workouts one can do to save time. I think that the swim run brick is one of the most time efficient workout sessions. You could swim a focused, targeted session and then immediately just run. And if we're talking about how to streamline and take the path of least resistance, that's a good sort of bread and butter session and concept to apply to a training plan. And there are other approaches as well. So the Vasa swimmer or swim trainer is a good way to supplement swim workouts. So that's an indoor. It sort of looks like a rowing machine, but you're on your belly and you're you're doing a swim motion, and there have been a lot of athletes who, in order to build swim strength and hone technique, they've supplemented their swim training with the Vasa, or they have replaced sessions with the Vasa. And I own one, and with the athletes I coach, I put them on it, and it's great for sort of working on technique, which is actually pretty darn important in swimming, because it allows the athlete to really just focus on the pool and, accelerating through that pool, focusing on getting that forearm vertical and finding sort of the sweet spot to where they can generate power. So a lot of times triathletes, they kind of lack shoulder flexibility, and they can't do that early vertical forearm because it applies a lot of load to that shoulder, or they just simply can't do it. So, the Vasa, you can kind of play around and learn what a good catch and pull feels like. And also, even probably more beneficial is just the strength building benefits of using the Vasa. You can set the resistance up and down, and you can truly execute an incredible workout on that machine in a short amount of time. But certainly you need to get in the water as well, and focus on technique and work on things like kicking and floating well, body position. But, those are just a couple of tools that many of the athletes I work with take advantage of in order to save time.
And let's talk a little bit about how you structure in intensity and key sessions within the typical training week. What does that look like for somebody who is not training the 20, 25, 30 hours of a professional athlete?
Sure. So when it comes to key intensity sessions, a greater percentage of the intensity load for most, I think, working professionals, amateurs, should be allocated to the bike for a few reasons. Number one, you can go very hard on the bike consistently, whereas for the run, most people, it's the discipline that they get injured within most often. So allocating intensity to the bike, it makes sense just from a perspective of injury prevention, but you can go hard more often. But I also think that the bike, one actually benefits a lot from intensity. Most of the athletes I work with, when I start working with them, there's a massive delta, for example, between their threshold cycling heart rate and their run heart rate, which is normal, and that holds true. But sometimes there are extreme differences, and the limiter is not necessarily their cardiorespiratory fitness. It's that cycling strength, that muscular strength. So
what would an example be of an extreme delta versus when you have worked with the athlete and you think that they are in balance?
So in general, after one trains, I tend to see maybe a 10 beats per minute delta, 10 to 15. But I've literally, this year I started working with an athlete and did the threshold test, and it was in the upper 120s was his threshold cycling heart rate, and then his run threshold heart rate was closer to 170. So that just sort of, and there are certain reasons for that. It's possible that he didn't know how to put out power, appropriately on the bike, didn't realize how hard one should go on the bike. But, oftentimes, might see a delta, somebody's, threshold heart rate might be 140 and then their running threshold heart rate would be in the 160s, which I do think that is too much. And as cycling strength improves, that delta minimizes. So I do think that higher intensity sessions, they're just efficient for building cycling fitness, and especially in a discipline where it's common for people to allocate a lot of time. I think that in the traditional, maybe triathlon training model, the cycling volume is massive, because professional cyclists, they put in massive training load because because they can. They have the luxury of spending a lot of time in zone 1, zone 2, sort of honing that foundational base fitness on the bike. But triathletes, we have to balance 3 sports. And when it comes to cycling fitness, you can make massive gains by doing focused work, ideally indoors with a power meter. But, that I'm talking about circuit training with an eye towards getting as fast as possible. I mean, there's a certain enjoyment to going out and riding your bike 5 hours with your friends and stopping at the cafe and all that. But, in the grand scheme of things, if one is fiercely goal oriented and wants to be brutally efficient, then really the bike is one discipline where you can have a purpose for each session that includes some intensity. So what does that look like? So my big, what I'm particularly interested in is sort of what is the minimum time that one needs to spend within a certain zone in order to, incite that intracellular signaling that actually leads to improved fitness. And we have some ideas on sort of what the total interval volume should be within a certain workout. So, for example, VO2 workouts, aerobic capacity workouts, where you're spending time at, say, 110 to 120% of your functional threshold power, around 20 minutes total is probably enough. So maybe that looks 5 by 4 minutes, 6 by 3 minutes at VO2 with 50 to 100% of the interval duration time as the rest interval is extremely effective. And once you start, if you're going to try to do 40 minutes worth of VO2 intervals within a workout, I mean, the gains are going to become so marginal. And at a certain point, you are not going to get a benefit from the workout because you're just going to fatigue yourself and you can just hurt yourself. So the idea is to literally just warm up and then get the work in. So for VO2 intervals, again, call it 18 to 22 minutes is probably the sweet spot. For a sweet spot workout, I mean, you can spend a lot of time at sweet spot, but if one has, say, 50 minutes during the week for each cycling session, you can spend 30 to 40 minutes at sweet spot. You can break it up however you want. Say 2 by 20, you can do 40 minutes of over under sweet spot. But, the idea is to figure out, what's the minimum load that I can apply to my body while still getting a very, very good benefit from the workout. So that's sort of the context with which I view cycling training. So during the week, sessions are short. They tend to be short for most athletes. And then even the key endurance session, which usually happens on the weekends for most athletes, even that should be chock full of intervals. So for 70.3 training, I'm an advocate of accruing 90 minutes to 2 hours at 70.3 intensity for the longer rides. So that can look like a short warm up, and then 2 by 45 minutes at 80 to 85% of their functional threshold power. And when you do this, you get very used to putting out power on the bike. And when the race rolls around, you're not shocked or surprised at the power that, you put out. Whereas if you were pedaling in zone 2 all the time and, all of a sudden maybe Ironman intensity might feel too hard. So, there are fitness benefits from working at higher intensities. And when I talk about high intensity, I usually think of it as, say, upper zone 3 and above. But there's also psychological benefits as well.
And what about the swim and the run? If the bike is where you say that the most intensity is allocated, how do you allocate it on the swim and the run?
Sure. So for the run, volume is the most important component of running. And part of that is because running is highly traumatic in nature. And it, as I said before, it's a discipline people get injured in most often. So for the run, the idea is to maximize volume, but minimize the potential for injury. And you want to build durability and resiliency in the run, and that comes through volume. So spending time on your feet. So I'm a benefit of run frequency, rather than doing this, 3 run a week model, where one is a long run, one is a tempo run, one is a track session. I think that people just get injured too much when they do that. So, but I will say that obviously for high level athletes, and I coach some sort of elite athletes, and for them, obviously you need to cover the bases in the run. And I think that, having a steady diet of tempo runs and the traditional repetitions, 6 by 800 meters, that kind of work at least once a week is important. If one wants to be, world class in the Olympic distance triathlon, you need to integrate high intensity running. But for most age groupers who maybe don't have a running background, the emphasis is on building volume and, being careful. And you could do hills. Hills is a great way to build strength with, while minimizing trauma on the body, because there's just less force and weight that's, the body has to withstand. I mean, every step you take when you come down, that shock goes through your whole body. But if you run up a hill, you can kind of circumvent that. So for people who are injury prone, love doing hill reps actually on the treadmill. It's a great way to do that, because then you don't have the downhill component of that where you have to return to the bottom of the hill. So doing something like cruise intervals, where say 2 minutes flat and then 2 minutes uphill and then 2 minutes flat again, and that's one interval. You can do that 6 times or something like that. Then it's a great way to integrate intensity without, accruing trauma. But so I guess the key principles for run training is, just like in general, emphasize frequency and volume over intensity. And once you reach a high level, or you are running at least, say, 25 to 30 miles a week, then one can start thinking about integrating higher intensity sessions within the run. But there's just so many benefits just to be had by getting up to that 25 to 30 mile per week threshold. And for the swim, if you're swimming infrequently, then you should be, every swim should have at least some type of intensity component to it. So I do think that in the swim, technique does tend to trump fitness. However, you're not going to be able to hold your technique without fitness. So you have to balance it all. I think that for time-strapped triathletes, that threshold swim workouts are probably one of the best bangs for the buck. So, doing say 100 to 200 meter intervals with short rest, having that sort of as a good bread and butter session that's done weekly is important. But I do think that really still being obsessed with technique is probably the most important thing for time-strapped triathletes. So, if you're swimming 3 times a week, it's good to have an endurance session where you're swimming longer intervals, because really triathletes are endurance swimmers. So longer intervals, say 3 to 500 plus meters with short rest. Having that threshold session where, you might be accruing at a minimum 1,000 meters in the main set, but you can go up to 2,000, 3,000 meters if you're advanced. And then having one session that's sort of a hybrid, maybe technique, intensity workout is probably the most beneficial third session that one can integrate, where you're thinking about form limiters, you're doing drills that are actually productive, that have a purpose. So those are I think the 3 most important sessions to be done consistently. And then you can supplement. I mean, if you have 20 extra minutes, the swim is something where you benefit from frequency simply because it's technique-based. Technique-based disciplines, the more often you can engage in them, the better. Maintaining that feel for the water is important. But you can also supplement it, like I talked about before, with the Vasa training. And I've talked to various coaches, and some of them take the approach. Certain athletes that simply don't have access to a pool, and speaking with Rob, who connected us, Sam Gaudet, he lives in Scandinavia, and he just simply does not have access to a pool. So he does basically 100% of his swim work on the Vasa, which is kind of an interesting approach. But really, so he can spend 60 minutes, which is a fairly long time to be on the Vasa, but it's just all beneficial work, and there's no travel to prep time. So I do work with athletes, and we supplement the swim training with Vasa training, and you can get a great workout in on the Vasa in 15 minutes, and you're increasing that frequency of stimulus, and you're really boosting that swim strength, which translates very well, especially to open water.
Yeah, perfect. And going back a bit to the bike then, because you gave us your bread and butter workouts for the run and the swim, and you sort of already mentioned a couple of workouts, the VO2, the sweet spot, and the 7.3 race pace intervals, if that's your goal event. But just to make it clear, how would you structure the biking of the week? What would be the sessions in a typical training week that you would have in there?
So for a key intensity session, so I'm a big fan of sweet spot work. It's just, so that's upper zone 3, call it, 88 to 94% of your functional threshold power, and doing long intervals at sweet spot intensity is a great way to spend time. It isn't super traumatic on the body. You can, if cycling was your sole discipline, you'd probably do it almost every day. And I like to try to accrue at least 40 minutes at that effort within, a typical a key intensity session during the week. That's a great session. And then, so we have VO2 sessions as well. And those are structured to be performed at extremely high intensities. I think most people probably don't go hard enough on these things. They shouldn't be done at 105% of FTP. They should be done higher. And so they should be they should hurt. And, they shouldn't be all out, but they should be pretty darn close. And I like to keep those intervals short. So, at the beginning, starting at, 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And then I don't like to go more than 5 minutes for VO2 intervals. But, there actually have been studies done trying to figure out, well, what's the ideal interval duration for these VO2 sessions. And, whatever protocol that they had in the study, 30 seconds, pretty much all out with equal rest or 50% of the interval duration rest was actually incredibly effective. So one workout that I prescribe fairly often are literally 30-second VO2 intervals. So 10 by 30 seconds at 120 to 130% of FTP with equal recovery. So you're doing 10 of those, then you're resting for 3 minutes, and then you're repeating that set. So you're doing 10 more intervals, 30 seconds at 120 to 130% of FTP, and with 30 seconds rest. And so you do that set 3 times. So, it ends up being just 15 minutes really at VO2 intensity. But because the rest interval is so short, your heart rate is elevated the whole time. So if you're doing 5 by 5 minutes, your heart rate is pretty much resetting back to maybe, zone 2 in between the intervals. But, if you keep the rest short and the intervals are also short, you can recover in between each interval to the extent that you would be able to then hit VO2 intensity on the next interval, but you're still keeping your heart rate elevated, and you can sort of reap the benefits of the VO2 workout probably more efficiently. So we have sweet spot workouts, VO2 workouts, and then, you have threshold workouts, and I probably do these least often, but, things like 3x10 or 2x15 minutes at functional threshold power, which is very high intensity. Those are good workouts to do as well. But again, I think that sweet spot and VO2 work is probably more important than spending time exactly at 100% of threshold. So those are important. I'm also a big fan of cadence works, particularly low cadence, just to build that strength. So doing intervals like 2 minutes at, say, 95% of FTP, but at 50 RPMs, and then immediately after that 2-minute interval, doing 2 minutes at 95% of FTP at a very high cadence, so say 110 RPMs. So contrasting those two, that is a very good workout, because when we're riding outside, cadence is constantly changing, and it's good to have the ability to sort of be agile in what kind of cadence you feel comfortable at. So benefits of low cadence, it builds that strength, but it also, it really increases your ability to, when you go up a hill in training outdoors, it feels natural, and you don't overly fatigue yourself. It isn't a new stimulus in the race. So you want to practice cadences as well. And you can practice cadences within a sweet spot workout. 5 minutes, if you're doing a 20-minute sweet spot interval, 5 minutes low cadence, say 60 RPM, and then 5 minutes, 95 to 105% or 105 RPMs for that cadence, and then just alternate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And there are a lot of muscular recruitment or muscle fiber recruitment benefits to varying the cadences as well. So I'm totally in agreement there. Let's talk a little bit then about, you mentioned there that depending on the strengths and weaknesses of the athlete, you might shift things around with the volume and how you allocate the time to the different disciplines. Can you elaborate on that and what athletes should think about when it comes to that time allocation between different disciplines?
Yes. So if there are obvious limiters sort of in an athlete's toolbox, and one way to establish where your weaknesses are is to compare your results in a race within each discipline relative to the field. So if you're coming out of the water in the bottom 10% of the field in a triathlon, but you're in the top 50% or the top 20% in the other disciplines, obviously the swim is a weakness. So then you have to ask yourself, what are the potential, how much can I improve in this discipline, and how will it translate to actual race performance? So, if somebody wants to maximize their potential in draft legal Olympic distance racing, well, you have to be a great swimmer and you have to be a great runner. So obviously for those athletes, you need to be swimming more than 2 to 3 times a week. If you truly want to, swim an 18, 19 minute, 1500 meter swim, then you need to spend time in the water, and you can't get by with 2 to 3 swims because you have to make that top pack. And also the run is extremely important as well. So if running, I think much like swimming, benefits from some time. So cycling, there isn't a whole lot of technique to it. There isn't really a whole lot of, I think, economy. I don't think you can really improve your form all that much on the bike, although it's possible. But for running and swimming especially, I think it takes a little bit of time to sort of reach one's potential and to blossom, so to speak. So for people who are just starting out in triathlon and maybe they have a swim background, well, those individuals, we might try to emphasize the run a little bit more, but do it intelligently. So just focus on frequency of the run more, allocate a little bit more load to the run in order to get up to that, kind of what I talked about before. You want to get up to 25 to 30 miles per week on the run. And then if you want to be competitive, you have to run more than that. At the professional level there, I don't think there's a pro running less than 50 miles a week. Most of them are probably in more than that, but I think there is a point of diminishing returns somewhere in there, probably that 40 mile per week range. And, you have to figure out, based on one's sort of individual talents and limiters and goals, how to allocate load across disciplines. So, but, it's obvious if you're weak in a discipline, then you should really focus on that discipline if possible. But, sometimes there's low hanging fruit.
What does that mean practically though? If we look at a program, and let's say a very sort of standard week might be 2 swims, 3 bikes, and 4 runs, as you mentioned in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Even something that many listeners would be perhaps more used to would be 3 workouts of each discipline, so 3. Mm-hmm. But if we have a weakness in, say, the swim that we really want to work on, and you don't have any more time to use, so you need to sort of skew your schedule somehow and take time from another discipline. How far can you go, and for how long can you do that? Do you work in block periodization in that way, or do you do that for an extended period of time? And if so, how do you reallocate the time between disciplines so that you don't lose too much in the other disciplines either?
Gotcha. So yes, block training is great for improving within each discipline, and the benefit of block training is that those gains tend to linger. So the winter is a great time to do this, or the off season, where you pick a weakness and then you attack it. So you peel back, you eliminate a run session. You replace, if you want to get good at swimming, maybe you do have to peel back. You have to eliminate or scale back a run. And you just replace it with a swim session. So that is a great approach. As a general rule, I would be weary of scaling back cycling sessions for most age groupers, simply because the bike is extremely important. So I would say if you're going to swap time and there's no way to create more time, then peeling back the duration of a run or replacing a run with a swim, if one wants to add a swim session, is a good approach. But the other thing is don't forget that, especially for the swim, you can reap palpable benefits just by spending 20 minutes in the water. So just add 1 or 2 short 20 to 30 minute swim sessions and you'll probably improve, because a lot of swimming is a feel for the water. So, as soon as you hop in the water, you're going to have a very good feel for it because you're not fatigued. And then as the workout continues, you're going to get more and more fatigued, and perhaps the benefits to technique as a swim workout diminishes. So, I would say ideally, if you do want to maybe focus on the swim, and, if you would run, maybe say your normal swim run brick is, 40-minute swim, 40-minute run. Well, maybe just allocate more to the swim. Or if on a normal run day, if you had a 50-minute run, just maybe run for 20 minutes and then throw in a 20 to 30-minute swim as part of that. So that swim run brick is one of the most just time efficient brick workouts, along with a bike run brick. But so I think being strategic in that way is the best approach. But in general, for most, I think the hierarchy of importance, especially in long courses, is bike fitness is most important, followed by run fitness, followed by swim.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned there in the context of workouts, but I want to dig into a little bit more from the context of the whole training program, is recovery. And that's something that's not necessarily easy, even if you're training at a lower volume. But when you factor in work and family and other obligations, then it can be a challenge. So what's your take on recovery, both on a more acute scale, like after harder sessions, but also on a more chronic scale, like how to make sure that the training that you're doing doesn't continuously add load on you that you can't really absorb?
Yes. So, typically in a lower volume plan for working athletes, the percentage of workouts, they're going to be a higher number relative to the whole plan of sessions that are going to be higher intensity. And when you do higher intensity sessions, recovery becomes paramount because we're not gaining fitness while we're actually executing the workout. What governs adaptations, it's really going to be your ability to recover afterwards. And sometimes that's hard to do if you have a lot of other life stress. So if you're working 70 hours a week and you're doing, say, 3 key intensity sessions a week, it becomes important to really be vigilant with recovery. So what does that look like? Sleep is number one. I'm a big advocate of waking up early, but if one is compromising sleep, well, that's not a sustainable thing to do. So the priority needs to be sleep. Everybody's different. I would say at minimum 7 hours, 8 is better. 9 is amazing. But it is important to really emphasize that. And nutrition is important. You want to eat balanced. You want to eat well. You don't want to put junk into your body. And hydration is another important thing. If you're not hydrated, it's going to impact your ability to recover and then to perform well in the next session. So all of these are important considerations, and those are the 3 most important things. There are other tools that people use. People like the boots, like the Normatec boots, and those are great. Especially if you believe in them, and massage is a great way to recover. If you have certain, you have tightness in certain areas and you lack mobility, then things like yoga can help and stretching can help. But, people often, they overstretch, and that is somewhat counterproductive. But, when it comes to recovery, the biggest things are, it's sleep, hydration, and nutrition. But the other thing is just work stress, family stress, all stress. It really does inhibit physical recovery from workouts. So, I really think it's important just to carve out downtime where you're just not doing anything, because that allows you to recover from the workouts, but also life stress. So work stress and all the other responsibilities that you have. So if it's possible, at all, to try to condense and get work done when you're focusing on work, and then really, focus on doing things unrelated to triathlon and career or whatever. I think those blocks of time are extremely important just for mental well-being and mental health, and also physical recovery.
Like Google and some other companies are doing some really innovative things in that space where they're introducing, I'm not sure that they're mandatory, but at least, but I guess that, not mandatory, but optional breaks for like napping and meditating for their employees. And that's part of their working day. And actually, I think it makes a ton of sense. They're going to get that for their employees, because even non-triathletes don't sleep enough if you look at the average person in the Western world these days. So having the ability to get in a 30-minute nap or even just some time for some mindfulness, that's going to help. And I think that if you approach your employer the right way, depending on what kind of company you're working for, they might agree that you can have a 15-minute break to just take a quick nap or just do some mindfulness meditation or something like that. So there are definitely creative ways to create that that's white space. But at the same time, I think the most important thing is, as you said, the sleep that you get during the night, and trying to get at least 7 hours as a minimum, and realizing that that's when you can do all the Normatex and massages and everything, and those are great, but they're for muscular recovery. But you also put a lot of stress on your nervous system, and that's not going to be helped by the Normatex or the massages. You really need your sleep to get the adaptations and get the recovery that the nervous system requires between sessions.
Yes, absolutely. It isn't a sexy answer, but I mean, you're right. It really does come down to sleep. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the most important thing.
What are some other things that we should consider when it comes to, I guess, making time and saving time for training? If we have a limited amount of time, then it becomes even more important to make sure that we're actually using all the time that we really have. And sometimes I think we don't realize that we have a little bit more time than we actually think we have, just because we might do some things inefficiently in terms of streamlining things. And one of the things you mentioned already many times is the swim, run, brick, which is a great example. Do you have some other ideas for this?
Yes. So one kind of rule that I have, and it's that I sort of talk about with my athletes, is understanding that just doing something is better than nothing. And I kind of touched upon it earlier, wherein, if I prescribe say a 70-minute run or a 60-minute run, if an athlete doesn't have time to do that, they just don't do anything. But in reality, your body, incites these adaptations, the cellular signaling that sort of occurs that while you're working out, and that your body is essentially telling itself to make adaptations for improvement. I mean, you don't have to, a workout doesn't have to be 60 minutes or more to achieve, a level of fitness benefit. So one rule that I have is the 30-45 2-a-day rule. And basically that just means that, if you can carve out a 30-minute block and a 45-minute block anywhere in the day, that is, you can drop a workout in there and you can perform extremely well at triathlon. If you are able to carve out 2 times a day where you're able to do a 30-minute and a 45-minute workout consistently. So if you can string multiple days, multiple weeks, multiple months together, where you're getting stimulus within 2 disciplines a day, that can be short, i.e. 30 minutes and 45 minutes, then that's the most important thing. So just throw out so obviously it's important to have a targeted plan and every workout should have a purpose, but what's even more important than that is just consistency. And so, you can roll out of bed, 45-minute cycling workout with, you can scale the warm up and cool down. You can perhaps scale down the duration of, a couple of the intervals or something like that. But the idea is to get the stimulus, and you can get a great stimulus on the bike in 45 minutes if you ride indoors. And then on the lunch break, you can do a 30-minute run, or right after work, you can do a 30-minute run. And then right before dinner, and it's a great day. That's a great day of training. So all the massive sessions are they're beneficial. Obviously, specificity is important. You're doing an Ironman, you can't get by with 30 to 45 minutes a day of training. But every time you work out, your body is going to get fitter. And it's important to recognize that, kind of like I said, fitness is not a bank account that increases proportionate to the number of hours you put in. We're biological organisms, and it's about doing what we can do and then setting these adaptations and honing the engine, rather than thinking about, hitting some arbitrary volume goal each week. So anyway, so number one is understanding that short workouts are beneficial, and it's easy to drop them in. And so that's one, I guess, unique strategy that maybe a time crunched athlete should think of. But, sometimes maybe it's easier to get one larger block to allocate one block of time in the day and then do a brick workout. So if the only time that you have available to work out is the morning, then you can make great gains by, say you have 90 minutes in the morning. Well, 60 minutes main session and 30 minutes supporting session is fine to do that. But I think striving for frequency of stimulus within the disciplines is most important, no matter whether that's several times in the day or condensed into one block. And the other thing is figuring out how to structure a week, but have it be sort of modular. So if you're traveling, for example, it's tough to swim and bike. So, have a strategy to where if you're traveling, then you focus on the run. So you have a run block of training. You can do the key swim and bike sessions maybe right before you travel, and then you can hop right on to another bike swim session when you come back. So, so being agile with training and not looking at the training plan as something that's carved into stone. It's a living, breathing plan, and you should have the ability to switch things around. But one thing that I like to do as a coach is sort of try to convey the philosophy surrounding a microcycle or a week, and try to have the athlete understand that, the idea is you want to space out the key intensity sessions and recover in between them, but, have them understand that there's a rhythm to training, there's a rhythm to a microcycle. And once they kind of understand the rhythm, the need for recovery after key sessions and things like that, they sort of get confident, and they maybe have the ability to move things around in the most rational and the best way. So being agile is important as well. And I guess one other thing that is worth mentioning is, if one is looking to maximize performance, is the importance of body composition. So the fact of the matter is, a major limiter when it comes to people actually, I think, achieving their potential is certainly training and being consistent, but it's also body composition. And if you focus on that and you aim to, strive for good body composition, that training will be easier and you'll have the ability to race better. And in that vein, I think strength training is important. It's important for maintaining body composition and even on a low volume plan, short strength sessions, they could be as short as 15, 20 minutes, are important for performance in and of themselves, but also for injury prevention and also for body composition. So it isn't necessarily just the training that's important if you're time crunched. I mean, you can get better at racing by focusing on things independent of swim, bike, run. So when you start thinking about strength, you start thinking about body composition and eating well, hydrating, eating enough, but also not overeating things that are terrible for you or drinking too much alcohol, things like that. All of this added together can really make one a better athlete and maximize performance on race day.
What do you think is a time efficient way to get strength training done?
So I think body weight exercises, if you don't have access to a gym with free weights, you can do, perform a great strength session just using your body weight, or, if you get a couple kettlebells or something. So, for triathletes, you want sort of functional strength. You don't just want stringy muscles, biceps. Everybody likes the big arms, but, and doing curls is fine, but you really want to focus on the doing the strength work that's efficient and that leads to gain. So when we think about auxiliary stuff or strength stability stuff, that's where bodyweight training can really go a long way. So things like unilateral glute bridges, single leg squats, leg raises, and then core work. So planks, flutter kicks, Russian twists. Those things can be done very basically anywhere, in your hotel room, in the living room. And then when you're in the weight room, you can streamline a workout just by focusing on the core lifts, the compound movements. So things like deadlifts and squats. If you're looking for the biggest bang for your buck, it's going to be those compound movements that utilize a lot of multiple muscle groups. So you're moving a lot of weight with each rep, and it's more efficient than doing a bunch of tricep kickbacks or pull downs and preacher curls and things that focus on maybe muscles that are small and sort of mostly irrelevant for swim, bike, run. So focus on what matters in strength training and also what's convenient.
Yeah, and I think making a home-based gym that deserves its own episode, but it's something that if for listeners that don't have access to a gym, or it's just not convenient because it might be too far away, then you don't need a lot to make a really effective sort of home environment to do strength training. As you said, a couple of kettlebells is great. I also think that the resistance bands are superb for this. And then you have some other things that you might want to consider, like a pull-up bar could be useful, and of course a gym mat or something like that. But that's basically all you need to do a really, really effective workout. And even if you don't have that, then you can do a lot with just the body weight exercises that you already mentioned.
Sure. Yes, it is. I guess it goes back to the concept of what makes indoor cycling training so great. It's that the one overarching goal is to try to minimize prep and travel time if you're sort of a time-strapped athlete, and the home gym is a great way to do that. Anything that you can do to sort of lower the time cost, but also sort of the mental cost of training is a good approach.
Yeah, I have an athlete that he recently moved houses, and I realized this isn't possible for everyone because they moved into a slightly bigger house. So he had the basement to turn into a pain cave, essentially. But if you have a basement like that and can do that, what he did was to basically, he didn't just get the minimal equipment, but he got a squat rack and different sets of weights. And I told him at first that, don't you have a gym close by, because it's going to be difficult for you to get all the weights that you want to do to be able to really progress with the free weights. But actually he got more than enough of the weights that was needed, and the total cost ended up being surprisingly low. You don't need to be a member of a gym for many months to offset that with just building your home-based gym. And I was surprised to find that, because I thought it would be a much more expensive affair to build out a fairly well sorted home-based gym, but it turned out that it really wasn't.
Exactly. I know Craigslist, I always see people selling their old it was like a classifieds website in the US or Facebook Marketplace. People just giving them away for free. So it's pretty darn easy to get some free weights or even, I don't know, the old machines, because it's taking up space in some people's homes, and they don't want it. They'd much rather somebody come and haul it away for free. So
this has been really, really useful, and I think this is a good place to wrap up this discussion. But before we go, we will of course do the rapid fire questions. And the first one is: what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon?
Related to triathlon, it would probably be the Training Peaks coaches blog. So that's on Training Peaks, and basically it's composed of coaches from all over the world contributing articles, and that's useful because it's a good way to learn about new studies related to training, exercise science, and I think that as a coach, it's important to have this insatiable thirst for new information and self-improvement. So I think that reading about what other coaches have to say and their experiences and is important, and that Training Peaks is a great source for good articles and blog entries related to triathlon and sort of the latest advances and sort of perspectives and thinking related to the sport.
And what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
Personally, waking up early and has helped, because as the day goes on, at least personally, this brain fog sort of sets in, and other life responsibilities kind of come up, even if you don't expect them. So the morning is a good time because, at least personally, there's just mental clarity, and it's a guaranteed time where there won't be any interruptions. So as far as triathlon training goes, the morning is a great time to focus on executing the key session for the day. But it's also just a good time to gain perspective on the world and kind of prepare for the day. You feel like you get a jump start in the world by waking up early. And it also sets the tone. So I think waking up early and feeding your brain with good information, good content, maybe some good inspirational or motivational readings or videos is a great way to start the day. And I think that is just important just for mental well-being to have that time to oneself to just reflect, create a game plan for the day, and accomplish what's most important.
And finally, what do you wish you had known or done differently at some point in your career?
So one thing, when I was younger and, running and in high school or college, I think I had maybe a more common perspective mentally or psychologically towards endurance sports, which is like, oh, I have to perform well, or I need to win, or whatever. But one thing that I think helped me enjoy endurance sports more, or enjoy life more, is just sort of develop a more healthy and productive perspective on endurance training or on triathlon. And just the idea that, you can't control what happens to you. You can just control your response. So I think it's just kind of a good rule for endurance athletes in general. For racing, for example, when a lot of things can go wrong and you don't have control over certain aspects of the race, but you do have control over your response to them and what you do in the moment. And even if it's a bad race or something bad happens, you don't perform well, as long as you know that you did your best and that you were calm and you responded to the best of your ability, well, that's a win. So to answer your question, I think just developing a good perspective towards triathlon and working on the psychological aspects of that is important. And it's helped me become a better athlete, a better coach, a better just human being. So I guess that's my answer to that one.
Yeah, great answer. So finally, where can the listeners find out more about you and check out what you got going on? So they can visit my website, www.workingtriathlete.com. There's some information there, some articles, and I also wrote a book called The Working Triathlete, which is available on Amazon, or one can download that directly from my website, www.workingtriathlete.com. Could find me on Instagram at coach_Goeringer.com. So yeah, feel free to check out those sources, the book, the website, articles, etc. And everybody should not hesitate to reach out to me with questions or comments and whatnot. Excellent. Thank you so much, Conrad, for coming on. This has been really great, and I know that the listeners will get a lot of value from this interview. So thank you once again. Great. No, thanks, Michael. I enjoyed it, and you have a great day. I hope that you enjoyed that interview and found it useful. It should be highly relevant for most of our listeners, I'm sure. There was one thing that I wanted to add to the interview that me and Conrad discussed after the interview, after we pressed stop record, and that was about how your life stress also impacts on how much training stress you can absorb. And the thing that we discussed and that I want to point out now is that you can choose to a degree how much stress or how much strain you experience from external stressors like problems at work and so on. It is to a degree something that you can choose, like how you react to stress can be highly different for two people, even though the actual external stressor, like a problem coming up at work, and it can be the same problem, can be the exact same. But person one might be pretty chill about it and not let it get to them too much, and person B can get highly anxious and things like that. And clinical anxiety, of course, is one thing, but there is an aspect of you being able to manage your reaction to stress, and that's what we wanted to mention here. That as somebody who has a limited time available to train and a limited ability to absorb additional training stress, choosing how you react and trying to minimize how you react to stressors and minimize the stress in that way is another trick that you can use. Trick is a bad word. Another piece of advice for how you can maximize the absorption of training load that you can get on that limited ability that you have due to other commitments like work and family and so on. So that was a long-winded explanation, but I hope that I made it pretty clear. You can find the show notes for this episode as usual on thattriathlonshow.com, and there will be links to plenty of related episodes there, and also those links are in the episode description in your podcast app. Next Monday, I interview Pete Magill, who is a real superstar in running, a Masters World and American record holder, and somebody who has run a sub 15-minute 5K at the age of 49. And honestly, too many accolades to list, but his CV is long. And that episode will be a special one on run training. And I have to say, it's a really good interview, so you have to make sure that you don't miss that. If you aren't already subscribed, of course, I highly recommend that you do so, because then you will automatically get the episodes as they are released. And also, I appreciate any help I can get with spreading the word about the podcast. So please do tell your friends and training partners about the podcast, even if they're not triathletes. Any endurance athlete can find episodes that are relevant for them. And also, if you have a minute, take that minute and go and rate and review the podcast. It really helps a lot. Big thanks to Roka for sponsoring the episode. You can get 20% off your order on roka.com with the promo code TTS, all caps. And thank you to Precision Hydration that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Take their free online sweat test to get a personalized hydration strategy and get your first box or tube of electrolyte product for free with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow, all one word, all caps. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.